Mark Selby, how are we?
Very good, Mr. Matthew Gordon.
Well, I bet. I think I know why you're in a good mood. Would you like to talk to me about nickel prices?
Yes. So we spent the last 3 weeks in that 16.5 to 18.5 range. And this morning we were up almost 5%, up over $18,000 a ton. Big reason why that's particularly interesting is Chinese New Year lasts in its entirety, about 2 weeks. Most people take the full first week off. And so you're starting to see people come back to the market. So the fact that 1 or 2 days in, we still have another week before everybody comes back, that we're already seeing these kind of price moves. And the key piece is, over this last 3 weeks that we've talked, as LME prices have consolidated in this range, we're seeing the physical supply chain. We had massive moves in January, but those moves, we've seen another tick higher in a couple of measures. And again, most importantly, in terms of really demonstrating that, things are tightening up. The one thing that has moved is Philippine ore prices to Indonesia. So, that's the swing volume. And so to see that continued increase in Philippine ore prices is very good and sort of, I think, speaks to the tightness of the market. I think by the time we get to sometime between now and the end of March, we should see it. Maybe by the end of today, we'll likely pop back up into the 18.5 to 20,000 range, and expect to definitely be testing the upper end of that range. By the end of March, as we're in this Philippine rainy season, when ore availability is really tight.
Okay, so let's talk about sustainability of all of this. Not necessarily speaking in a green way. I'm just talking about the price has been under a lot of pressure for the last 3 years. You talk about Chinese New Year. Didn't seem to get this reaction last year around Chinese New Year holiday. What are the things which are going to help this nickel market stay at this upper end of the ranges we've seen over the last 6 months?
Yeah, it's the physical market follow through. So again, you can see prices move in an LM, on the exchange traded materials, but where you get a confirmation that the move in the exchange is not just speculation, but actually driven by fundamentals, is when you see the follow through in these sort of physical, physically privately traded markets. And so, we've seen that in a very robust way. Given the size of the move in January that we saw across a bunch of these materials, it quite likely could have seen a little bit of a pullback, but the fact that most of them have ground up another $1 or $2 higher, particularly when we're heading into Chinese New Year and when things, calm down in Asia. And so the fact that we're out of the gate already with this morning's price move, and yesterday's price move, is pretty reassuring on that front. And again, we've seen a bunch of more physical news confirming that, the ship is headed in this direction of tighter nickel supply, higher nickel prices, and that Indonesia, is intent on really making that happen.
Right. Okay. Now, I think we also better talk about the companies that may benefit from this kind of resurgence in nickel price and nickel market, structural and fundamentally. First on the list, who are we going to talk about today?
Well, the one company that's not benefiting from the Indonesian ore tightness. So Eramet last week announced that their quota from one of the world's largest nickel mines, they literally produce over 10% of the world's nickel, had their quota cut from 42 million tons to 12 million tons. Now, again, I think we saw the announcement from Vale early on in January. Again, whether this is a coincidence or whether it's a conscious effort from the Indonesian government to pick on those publicly reporting companies that have to disclose that to the market. If they cut 30 private Indonesian mining companies' licenses, that's not going to show up in the market. But, these kind of cuts definitely do so. The other challenge is, Western companies doing business in Indonesia. It is still, there's a level of corruption there, unfortunately. And so perhaps they have not provided the appropriate incentives to the appropriate government groups to get, their share of the quotas relative to some of the other players in the market. And so, that's a massive, that 30 million cut just in their quota, that's about 300,000 tons of nickel, or 10% of global supply. Now, they'll get some of that back between now and then. But, that, again, is just a clear signal Indonesia is really taking this on. And again, this is a mine that's supporting a plant that was built in Weda Bay, specifically there. So it's significant that this is what's happening in that region. So
okay, and it is a regional play in the sense that you've got Indonesia and the Philippines associations have launched something called the Indo-Phil Nickel Corridor. What are they trying? And that's off the back of numerous talks about Philippines trying to kind of control kind of pricing in the market. What is this Indo-Phil Nickel Corridor going to do for globally?
Yeah, so again, this is all the things moving, and the train has left the station. Everything's starting to line up. They've been dancing from time to time about creating some sort of cartel organization. This is not a formal cartel at this point. In fact, Indonesia, when they hosted the G20, 3 or 4 years ago, approached Canada on the sidelines about joining their cartel, literally explicitly. Now, the Philippines is the second largest nickel supplier in the world, just over 300,000 tons. They're the other big ore supplier in the region, and so both mining associations have created this working group, to be able to coordinate activities. So again, it's getting on the page that it makes more sense for everybody to make some money in this business rather than trying to just take this limited resource and just produce it in a way that no one's getting any value from this limited resource. So again, good to see it, another big step in the right direction.
Seems to be, and I think the market is perhaps starting to take note of this as a serious intent, shall we say? Right. Those are the negatives.
Oh, we got one more negative.
We got one more negative, Mark.
Yeah. So it's tough week. So Sherritt, who operates the Moa Bay operation in Cuba, some of you probably saw the news earlier last week about fuel shortages in Cuba. So they've had to announce that they're basically turning down their operations. They're waiting until the fuel supply situation becomes more stable. Now, it won't have an immediate impact on production because the refinery in Canada has a couple months worth of inventory, that they'll continue to run down. But that's about. I mean, today it's about 1% of global supply, so it's not going to have a big impact. But again, it's just that a little extra marginal stuff that's there. So
okay, I guess this is all kind of good news in the short term. But as long as there's not kind of kill switch if these things come back on. Give me the good news. Vale?
Yeah. So there's a whole series of different announcements over the last few weeks here, and actually some fundraising in the nickel space, which is good to see. So first off, Vale sold their Thompson nickel asset to a group, Exiro, as a Canadian group, with some funding from Orion and support for the Canada Growth Fund. Doesn't look like it's really much money up front, but a commitment to spend a couple $100 million into the asset. This is an asset that has been unloved by both, even back in the Inco days 20 years ago. It was always sort of the fifth kid in the family, and under Vale, it was even more the fifth kid in the family. And so it's good to see a Canadian asset get some additional support there. So hopefully the production from there, just to give you some stats, I mean, fell from 40,000 tons of nickel a year when Inco had it in 2006. And I think last year they produced about 10,000 tons of nickel. It'll be, hopefully that turns the corner and starts heading in the right direction as Canada. We produced some good news, not necessarily anything to do with nickel, but, we've talked about, we've got 3 levers in terms of being able to inject and store CO2 and permanently removing it from the environment. So we've been working for the last several years with the University of Texas of Austin through a U.S. Department of Energy ARPA grant. And what they were doing is basically pumping CO2 soaked fluid directly into the rock to see about carbonating the rock before you mine it. If you do that, it's more fractured, and that should allow you to use less energy to grind it and less energy to blast it. And so there's still more work to do there, but the test went very successfully. They're able to push that CO2 in the ground without having to, better than expected. And what that does is really open up, if we've got ultramafic rock, that's not necessarily, and again, we've got 20 deposits in the region. if some of those turn out to be less economic than others, we can look at just using them to be able to, capture and store carbon for a period of time. Because, what we've been positioning Timmins Nickel District is not only a huge source of nickel globally, but really as a foundation for a net zero industrial cluster. And we've talked before about that. So again, this just creates another real lever in terms of being able to capture and remove carbon from the environment.
What's it do for you financially, though?
Right now, not a lot. I mean, the Ontario government's not. There's basically a provincial carbon scheme in terms of how carbon credits get evaluated. Now, to the extent, in the future, in terms of carbon, like true carbon removals, if you look at groups like CarbFix in Iceland, they are able to work with the big tech companies who are serious about CO2 reduction, and get significant prices for that carbon removal. So, we'll see as we go forward. But it just, again, it's the enabler to create businesses that could generate, some significant revenue streams on top of the actual mining activity. So, it's some very nice optionality to have there for sure.
Okay. Look, I'm going to see you next week at PDAC. I think there's a few things I want to talk to you about, and maybe that'll be a better time than now. So just in terms of sticking with the good news. Okay, Magna, our friends Magna, how are they doing?
Yeah, so they had a busy couple of weeks. They put out 3 releases. So just after we talked last, about 3 weeks ago, they put out their 2026 guidance. They including their precious metal stream payments that they need to make. That their all-in sustaining cash cost was $5 to $5.60 a pound per pound of copper equivalent. That includes about $1, just under $1 a pound of sustaining cost, and production of about 16 to 18 million pounds of copper. We talked before, people do get all excited about high grade, but again, depending on the volume of high grade that's there, you might have to spend a lot of money and incur a lot of operating costs to get that out. Now, again, still early days in their operation. We'll see whether they'll be able to bring those costs down. But that there is a challenge there in terms of that. And I'm not sure, given their comment on the streaming costs, these ones must be picked up in what was originally an FNX deal back about 20 years ago with then Gold Wheaton on the precious metals payments that are there. So. Again, I'm not sure the exact details and so forth, but that's something to keep an eye on. On the good news front with them, first reserve at McCreedy West, about 1 million tons at 1.5% copper, almost 3 grams of precious metals. And today, with gold and platinum and palladium prices where they are, that's obviously helpful. And then a little bit of nickel and silver. And then Levack Footwall, which is the big target now of their exploration, looking for these footwall deposits that are really high grade copper. Again, some spectacular intervals, anywhere from 18 to 24% copper, 5 to 10 grams of precious metals. But over, anywhere from 0.7 to 1.5 meters. So that's fairly narrow in terms of doing it. So, we'll see how those evolve in terms of, what that reserve looks like. So the market seems to like the splashy grade. So, I think they're going to keep putting them out. So we'll see how it goes. And then the good thing is, last year was pretty brutal for most nickel companies in terms of being able to raise capital and advance projects. So, it's a nice start to the year to see, Fathom with their project in Saskatchewan, First Atlantic Nickel with their project in Newfoundland, and then Nican, who's advancing a project in the Thompson Nickel Belt. All raising, $3 million, $4 million, $1 million respectively. So, it's nice to see some daylight, and hopefully we'll have more things to talk about this year as we go through 2026 from a range of different companies, which is, we need all the nickel projects. So
we do need all the nickel projects, and it'll be interesting to sort of see how people kind of get there this year. So it's a fantastic market for metals generally, but also obviously we're very pleased to see nickel starting move through the phases and actually start delivering on the promise. Mark, I'll see you next Sunday.
We'll see you on Sunday. Take care.